to stop military action. Here is what Jiao Jiaquan, the China Foreign Ministry spokesman, had to say on the issue.
我们对医护人员和记者再次在冲突中不幸遇难感到震惊，予以谴责，对遇难者表示哀悼，向遇难者家属表示慰问。中方高度关注当前加沙地带局势，反对和谴责一切伤害平民、损害民用设施、违反国际法的行为，包括针对新闻记者的暴力行为。
Germany has also said it was shocked by the Israeli airstrikes on the hospital, which included journalists in the dead, and called for an investigation. The German Foreign Ministry urged Israel to allow media access and protect journalists operating in the Strip. US President Donald Trump expressed displeasure with emphasizing the need to end the conflict. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy also said he was horrified by the strikes and called for an immediate ceasefire. Turkish President Erdogan condemned Israel for, quote, villainous attacks, blaming the Netanyahu government for continuing strikes that destroy humanity's basic values. French President Emmanuel Macron also weighed in and called the attacks intolerable, noting that the deaths of at least 20 people, including journalists, stressing the need to safeguard civilians in Gaza. Now we're once again joined by Professor Hirschberger. As we've just heard, a strong plethora of reactions there from both adversaries of the Israeli state and, of course, traditional allies of Israel. What are your thoughts on the current military actions of the Israeli Defense Forces in the Gaza Strip? 5 journalists killed in these strikes, with what some people are calling a double tap assault, with video footage of the strikes circling online. Also a message from Benjamin Netanyahu, not necessarily jumping to the gun and calling those killed in the attack Hamas agents like we have seen previously. Professor, your thoughts and the feelings around you on this attack coming out of Israel?
So I think the attack yesterday is different from previous attacks in several ways, and may turn out to be a watershed moment in this conflict. One of the main differences is that this attack was televised. It's very clear that the people who were hurt in the attack were journalists and civilians, and not Hamas terrorists. That's one difference. Another difference that I think is important to point out is that Netanyahu never condemns anything and never expresses any kind of regret about anything. And in this case, he has expressed his regret. This is unusual for him to do. And maybe the third difference is that even traditional Israeli allies have condemned the attack and have called for an end to the conflict, and that includes President Trump, who has pretty much announced that within 2 or 3 weeks, the war needs to end.
Yes, and Professor Hirschberger, people have accused Israel of silencing journalists and silencing voices coming out of the Gaza Strip. This is due to the fact, of course, that international journalists are not allowed into the enclave, which means that the journalists that were killed were indeed Palestinians who have been hired from the outside international legacy media companies that we have previously mentioned. How does this play into that narrative, and what does Israel think of it?
Well, up until yesterday's attack, it was very clear that the boundary between journalists and terrorists is a relatively fuzzy boundary. We've seen during the attacks of October 7th that many of the journalists also moonlight as terrorists, or the terrorists moonlight as journalists. But yesterday, it was much more clear-cut. Yesterday, it was clear that the people who were hurt by the attack were not involved in any kind of terrorist activity. And so this is one of the more clear-cut cases of attacking people who were very clearly not engaged in any kind of activity against Israel.
Thank you very much, Professor. You are staying with us to discuss further developments. And this